Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Mandy, and today we're going to make this Scarecrow shelf sitter. So this is kind of what it looks like dry fit together, and I wanted you to see that because you can purchase the DIY wood blanks from me if you want to paint this yourself, which is one of the reasons why I'm kind of sharing the process with you. So I don't have the listing up on Etsy, but I should in the next couple days. But I wanted to paint this with you. I did take a really long time to paint this because I was practicing some paint techniques. I watched tutorials from Chris Howard, who's the designer who makes these. But this particular file is not open to the public for another year or so. And so I wanted to share it with you because even if you're part of her group, unless you're part of the, the SVG club where we get these files, you wouldn't be able to purchase it yourself, so you wouldn't be able to see the tutorials. So her tutorial is super helpful, and she's a great decorative painter, and she's been doing it a long time. So sometimes I try to do some of the things that I see her do, and I'm like, crap, this is hard. So you can do these kinds of projects very basic. You can just separate your pieces, paint them the colors you want, assemble, glue them back together, and that's awesome, right? And there's lots of ways you can distress and shade and get different effects. But, sometimes if you're like mass producing because you have a craft show or something, you may not take the time to decorative paint. But I want to learn, so while I was making it, I just decided I'm going to video it and I'm going to trial and error and whatever. So it took me like 3 hours, which obviously this video is not going to be 3 hours. So there's going to be some that I cut out and some that I share, some that I speed way up. But what you see me doing here is I'm separating the pieces by color. So I have a picture in front of me that is based off of something that she staged, so I can have an idea of like what color should be what. And I have a piece of cardboard that I wrap tape around the front, and then I kind of tack down the pieces, and that just helps you paint faster, and it also makes it less likely that you're going to get paint all over the edges because you have a little bit more control. So you see I have everything that I'm going to paint yellow on the top. I've got a layer of red, etc. So now these little coveralls are going to be a different color, but now I'm kind of separating what's left into piles. So we do have to paint the background, so that's where we're going to start. But we don't have to paint all the background, so we need to paint his shirt. So I'm using DecoArt Americana paint. When I first started doing this, I'm used to using really high quality paint from Fluid Art. You don't really need high quality paint for this kind of a project, and sometimes craft paint like DecoArt, for example, goes on very smoothly, and it's less transparent than some higher quality paint sometimes. And so, like, save your money, use your higher quality paint for other things. You can also use house paint, so you can get similar house paint colors. You can have Home Depot or Lowe's mix similar colors. But for this is DecoArt Americana. This is Burlap. So this is a nice, very off-white kind of tan color. So we're painting his shirt right now. I'm using a makeup sponge. You can, if you have a roller, you can use a roller that's loaded with this color. I do have a roller this color, but I didn't use it for this for some reason. And this color also has pretty decent coverage. So we're going to paint his arms and his shirt this color. Then we're going to paint his gloves and his face with light buttermilk, which is just kind of an off-white. And there's some other parts that we need to paint, but not all of it. We need to paint his hat, but we don't need to paint the back of his hat because that's the base. So that's where a picture is kind of helpful the first time you do something, because you kind of know, okay, this is what I need to spend time on and this is what I don't. So I'm going to speed this part up for you. All right, so as you can see, we've just put a coat or two, letting it dry. While we're letting it dry, we're going to look at the next thing that needs to be painted. So we're going to focus on the gloves and the face. Now, you can see that we have score lines here. I don't really need the score line for the nose because I have a piece that goes where his nose is. But you can see I'm just barely touching that because I want the score lines for his eyes to stay there, because even though I'm going to use a dotting tool and I'm going to fill those in with black, I still don't want a bunch of paint in the score lines. And we're going to use our board to paint the gloves, so it'll hold the gloves in place while we paint. And this is really helpful because you can just kind of go color by color. It's sort of like painting by color. And then just set it aside to dry, move on to the next thing. It dries very fast. And then start gluing your pieces together. So now we're going to do the pumpkins. I'm doing Warm Sunset and Crystal Blue. So I'm going to use the Warm Sunset as my orange. Crystal Blue is going to be my teal color. Now this gets a little tricky because those pumpkins are going to show. There's only a 3D piece for the center, so you want to be careful as you're going around the edges. So I actually got a little bit of a brush and filled in those places just to kind of make sure that my edges were clean. So, you know, paintbrushes still have their part, right? And obviously we don't want a bunch of blue paint on the stem because that's going to be brown. So we're going to use the same crystal blue color for the hat and for the brim of the hat and for that little pumpkin piece that's going to go in the middle. Crystal blue is also a DecoArt Americana color, and it's a very pale blue. But what's neat is we end up doing some color shading with a deeper turquoise, and it actually makes this color look a little bit more turquoise, which is kind of cool how it does that, and it gives it a nice highlight. I am using makeup sponges I got from Amazon. I think they're on my Amazon list. I don't remember, to be honest. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do the orange Warm Sunset. You can really use any kind of fall orange. As you can see, I'm painting the pieces, and then I'm going to paint the background very carefully. All right. And same thing with the paintbrush, going carefully around the edges. We're not so worried about where his coveralls are going to go because they're going to be covered up. But we are wanting to be careful around that stem. And obviously we want to be very careful around the orange and the turquoise. We don't want them to blend. I personally like fall decor, but I don't only like fall colors. So to me, adding a teal or a turquoise really brightens it up and makes it more cheery and adds the appropriate level of contrast. So I really appreciate when people do that. All right, so now I'm just getting a little bit of brown paint so I can paint the stems while I'm already here. It really, oh, no, I'm not. So I'm actually taking an angle brush, and this is one of the things I talked about that I'm trying to learn. So I have a 3/8 angle brush, and basically you're just dipping it in water, getting some of the water off the brush. And I was using a milk chocolate color that I thought was too orange, so I switched, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to be good at this. I'm just going to use my distressing ink. And then I was like, stop being a baby and learn, right? So I wiped it off, and I got the brush out. So this is a 3/8 inch angle brush. I think it's a Royal and Langnickel or something brand. And I basically am dipping the paintbrush in a little bit of water, and then I'm just dipping the tip in the paint and then just kind of blending it on the plate until it's a little bit softer. And this, for some reason, was so hard for me to understand. But basically you're going right to the edge of the wood with your paintbrush, and you're just using it to highlight. And then if you have too much paint, you get a little bit more water and move it around. If you have too much water, you know, offload some of the water onto your paper or whatever, use a little bit more paint. It adds so much depth to your stuff, but it is kind of a practice thing, because I watch her do it and she just does it willy-nilly and it goes on great. I can do it about 85 times and it does not. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to do. I finally got frustrated with the smaller pieces and I just used my distressing ink. But you'll see when I get to do the little overalls, I spent way too much time on that. So while I have my brown paint out, I got a paintbrush and I painted the pumpkin stems. And I'm just painting the buttons. The buttons probably needed another coat, which I got later. So I'm using probably burnt umber or something like that. And then I painted the boots brown, and then I figured out they were kind of supposed to be black, but I just went with it. So I tried to kind of stick with the same idea that you want to paint everything that's one color and just kind of get it done and get it out of the way. So I'm accidentally splattering paint in my already painted areas here. So that's what you see me messing with. So now I'm gonna baby wipe brown the bottoms of the stand. So there's two pieces, the top and a bottom piece. And if you put like brown paint on a baby wipe and you run it over your wood, it kind of looks like a stain. So I'm just basically staining the back real quick before we get too involved, and the bottom while we're doing everything that's brown. You don't have to do that step. I do find it's a lot softer brown than if you were to like paint your paint stand brown. So I personally like it. So now we're taking the pieces off that we've already painted. We're getting our red pieces. We're going to use Tuscan Red to paint that scarf and the nose. And for the birds, I just paint them all black. And then later on, I will get a paint pen and paint the beak, and then add white dot for their eyes. And for the hair and the flowers, I'm using something similar to Marigold. I think I'm using a very similar color because the Marigold I had I couldn't find it. So that's the hair. Now we're going to do the Tuscan Red. And you don't really want to cover up your score marks, so you're just very gently dabbing the paint. You're not pushing into the wood. Even if you use a roller, you're just laying it on the top. You really don't want to mess up your score marks because they're part of the decor. So that's important, because when you're not used to painting with that level of detail, it's very easy to mess up. So here I'm taking a turquoise blue, or I think it's a turquoise blue, and I'm using that color, which I'm also going to use on the little overalls, I think, to try to do that shading. And I try it about 85 times before I finally think, okay, you're overthinking this. And I finally kind of sort of get it. But you can see it just adds a nice little bit of depth without being super sharp. And we're going to go on behind that and add some white lines and dots and stuff later. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And that's where I am a little bit of a perfectionist. I spend way too much time trying to get it to be perfect. And I don't think it's supposed to be perfect. I think it's supposed to be a little bit messy. And like where you mess up, you kind of compensate with your detail work later. So I don't think it's supposed to be perfect. And I think that's, good for our control issues. We learn to stop expecting things to be perfect before we just accept them. And, years from now, I'll probably look at this and be like, wow, I could have done way better than that. But look at the level of detail that it adds to the little hat. Now, all the stuff I'm doing down here on the brim is dumb because it's going to be covered up, so I don't really need to do that. But at the time, I didn't really think that through. So now we're going to do a little bit of shading on the pumpkin. We've shaded him in one area and on the piece that goes on the top. I'm not really sure what I'm doing, to be honest. Bear with me just a second. I'm going to speed this up. Okay, so I'm basically just doing some of that same shading on the bottom using that same color. Now, if I wanted it to be more of a contrast, I could even use a darker blue, but I didn't really have a lot of confidence in myself, so I really wanted it to be kind of subtle. So I used, you can see the color is the same color I have on the little overalls. I think it's a turquoise blue or something like that. But it's just a little bit darker, a little bit bluer, and so it's not a very big difference, but I wanted to keep it minimal. And what I do if I have too much paint on my plate, when I'm done, I just scoop it back up with my finger and put it back in the bottle. So now we're going to use Alizarin Crimson, and we're going to shade our pumpkins, and then we're going to shade the face of the Scarecrow. So I'm speeding this way up just because this video would be like 3.5 hours long, but same concept, just the very edge of the brush. You can see I'm spending way too much time on it. I erase it, I put it back. Like right there, the line's a little too harsh. So what we need is a little bit more water. But at the time I was like, well, I'm just gonna kind of touch it up in a second. But you can see the line is a little harsh. And you see that I keep messing with them. My line on this side is got a little bit too much water, but it's okay. It's part of the process, right? This one's kind of just right. It's just a nice fuzzy little touch of red, gives it a little bit of a balance. One of the things that she says is that if whatever you're going to highlight, do it all on the same side. So if you're going to use like shading, do it all on one side. If you're going to go and add white highlights, do it all on the other side. So you're kind of balancing out what you're doing, which looks great and makes a lot of sense. So, like, it seems like this is going really smoothly, but it's not. I probably took hours trying to get that right. But I think I finally figured out, okay, you're definitely overthinking this. And I was able to navigate through it a little bit. I'm still not good at it, but I'm getting there. So for this, we are going to use black. You could use a dark blue, but we're going to also do the shading on the scarf with the black. So we're going to just kind of do them both at the same time. So you see I started to paint the beak. I found like an orangey yellow works better. So I did this multiple times with this pale yellow, and then I went back probably off camera and changed it to the other color. But later on we'll add his little eye dots. So on the overalls, we are going to add some shading. Same concept, but then where the pockets are, you can see I dotted the eyes with a dotting tool. Where the pockets are, we're going to use the very pointy edge of that angle brush and just kind of highlight those pockets. And that was really hard for me, and I spent way too much time on that. For the flowers, you can do the shading. In this case, because they were easy to use a distressing ink, I just did that. And here we're just using a little bit of that Alizarin Crimson, not too much, because we don't want it to be too obvious, just to highlight his face red. So that was pretty simple. We've got the little leaves that go underneath the flower that probably should be green, but I painted them turquoise blue. And you can see with the black, it's kind of hard to get a soft line because it's such a harsh color. So it's really just kind of like get it on there and then blend it, but I was having a really hard time with that. So I'm going to speed this part way up because I took a really long time with this, and that would be super boring for you. But part of the reason it takes me so long is I was definitely overthinking it. Because when I watch her do it, she just slaps it on there and it looks good. When I do it, I do this about 800 times. But you can see, it seems a little harsh at first, so what I'm probably not doing well is getting the right amount of water and blending it enough first. So you can see on the plate how I'm kind of blending it first so I get a feel for how dark it's going to go on. So same idea. So we're just going all the way around, and then we're going to do more of the details with the angle brush. We'll skip some of this just because it goes on for a long time. Okay, so now I'm just dipping, I still have a wet brush, but I'm just dipping that paint, and I'm focusing more on getting a little bit of paint on the very edge and drawing that little pocket line in. I was overthinking that too, and I did it wrong like a bunch of times. So one of the things she said on the tutorials that you want to focus on, are you going to put your paint on the inside of the pocket or on the outside? And so I went for the inside because it has a more defined line. And you can see, like I can see now by looking at the video, just that little bit of color, it just highlights those details. And I think that I was probably trying to make it too perfect. And so those little circles are going to be our button lines, so we don't really have to do anything with that, but we're basically following the same concept for the little suspender edges as the pockets. And then this part will be done. We'll be able to maybe focus on the white highlighting. We are going to mess with the scarf a little bit. Same idea. This is a little bit easier just because it's smaller, and you've already got the score marks I actually shaded the top and the bottom and the little piece that goes over that looks like the knot. And it just adds a little bit of depth, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but you could even do this with a distressing ink, like a dauber or like one of those distressing ink crayons. You can wet a brush and do that. I think this is a little bit easier than using a brush and still using the crayon, because you're still fundamentally putting it on the same way. But you can do that. And I was trying to kind of follow the lines that are on there, and I was failing pretty badly, but I did okay right there. See? So from a distance, it doesn't look too bad. But when you're too close to anything, as artists, you know, like if you're too close to something, you're going to be so critical of it because it's just right in front of your face. So here I found the right marker and I switched it, fixing my bird noses. So now we're going to do some white highlighting, which I always love, and I've never been successful at it until I actually did okay on this one. White is a lot more harsh and just like black, and white is normally a lot more opaque. So I was trying to do just the right side of the buttons, and I was covering too much ground, and so I finally got really frustrated at them and put them to the side and started focusing on the highlights for the pumpkins. And then I came back to the buttons, and then I just decided, you know, if they look kind of wacky, it doesn't really matter. Once you put it all together, it'll be okay. So you see how we've got our dark shading on the left, our highlights on the right, kind of creating the depth. Now we're gonna highlight the boots. These are the boots. And we are gonna add an accent line to the boots later on, which I don't do a great job of, and I'm not sure that I did it on camera, but I may have, who knows. So obviously you don't have to do all of this stuff. There is also a white distressing ink pad. It's not that easy to find. I bought mine on Simon Says Stamp, and it's nice for stuff like this. If you just want to like soften something with white and you don't want to have a very defined color, it works great. But you can see how with those buttons being so small, that was a little bit challenging, but I started to get it, right? Now I'm going to try to add it to the bird. I didn't do a great job on the birds, but that's okay. It was also really late, and I was like, this can't possibly take this long. So I'm highlighting the nose with white. I did not low light or shade it with a darker color on the other side. I just felt like it was too small for that. And I'm completely off frame. So with the birds, I'm trying to kind of go across the top and then go around their little feathers. But I think it still softened them enough for them to have a little bit of depth. They weren't perfect. I added a highlight with paint later, but okay. So this is, I put the Scarecrow together off camera, and I didn't mean to, but I dotted his shirt off camera. So I took Alizarin Crimson and a dotting tool, and I just put those dots on his shirt. So when I put him together, I started with his hat and the pumpkins and the boots, and then I sort of filled in from there. That way I could make sure the outer pieces were straight. I glued the pieces with art glitter glue, which you can get on Amazon. It's not glittery like the name suggests, and it gives you enough time to reposition. But it has a nice hold once it sticks, but it gives you a little bit of working time. For his eyes, I used a dotting tool in black paint, and I just dotted and kind of pulled the paint into those score lines. So now what I'm doing is I have a number 2 liner brush, and I've dipped my brush in a little bit of water and then kind of gotten some of the water off the brush, but I have fresh white paint. So I'm basically taking a already wet brush, dipping my end of my brush into the white paint, and then using it to line. And as you can see, I don't have a very steady hand. Those lines seem a little bit harsh, so I probably need a little bit more water. But we're basically just adding some highlights. this is something else that takes a lot of practice for me because I am by no means a brush painter. And, you know, I'm a poor painter for a reason. We don't all have steady hands, and I love it when people do, but I personally don't. But I'm learning, and I'm learning that the lines don't have to be perfect and all of that. So, but that's what I'm doing is I'm taking the liner brush, just getting it a little bit wet, so because you don't want that paint to be so thick, and the water on your brush helps you carry it. I probably should have started that mark a little bit far over, but I didn't, right? So I glued everything together but that final flower, because it goes right where that bird is and where I'm about to do the second line. So I'm going to do the lines first. So I would do the lines with this brush, and then if I go and add any little dots, I'll use a dotting tool. I'm not very good at dotting with a paintbrush either. But you can see the lines aren't perfect. That's okay. And I had to kind of let that be okay. And then if they're too defined, wet your brush a little bit more and go back over them very gently to just kind of soften the harshness of the white paint. So you may not notice where I do that, but a lot of places I notice, I'm like, gosh, that seems so harsh. But now when I look at it through the camera, it doesn't really seem that harsh. But at the time I was like, that's just too harsh of a line, right? We want an accent. But you can see how I just took my brush and got it wet a little bit, and I'm just kind of softening the edge, softening that harshness of the paint. And the paint's still wet, so it's causing it to blend a little bit better. And I screwed that up. So I'm going to take a baby wipe to that part probably. But I'll speed this up in a second. But I just wanted you to kind of see the idea, because I mean, I filmed it for a reason, right? But if you enjoy tutorials with someone who's a little bit more skilled at this, the Sawdust Makery has a great Facebook group, and she does tutorials for people who, you know, use her files. So she does a great job. I'm just sharing with you my journey, because if you were to buy the wood planks and paint it yourself, I would like you to have an idea of like kind of what it would look like. Of course, you make it your own. You don't have to do all of this. You can just do paint colors you want and glue it together. Voila. And then after we do the final touches with this, we're going to splatter some white, also optional. I over splattered. I got a little bit too much paint on my stencil brush, but I just kind of like what it does, and it kind of gives you a nice blend. It kind of blends your piece together, so, and it softens it a little bit. So now I'm trying to figure out where else I need to paint these lines. Normally I skip this because I'm historically not that great at it, and it frustrates me, but I'm pushing myself to do it anyway because I think it's important to grow in the things we're not that great at. I have trouble going around those curves because, you know, I'm trying to keep my hand in one place. So you can see how it's kind of awkward. I didn't like that line, so I took a wet baby wipe and dabbed it. You don't want to rub it because we have paint behind there that we could rub off, but sometimes if the paint's wet enough, you can just dab it off and do it again. And but you know, now that this little guy is finished, all the things that I wasted so much time on, I'm like, I didn't really need to do that. I could have just moved on. I kind of messed that up right there. You can see why this took forever. Anyway, I'm going to speed this part up because it's long, but I wanted you to see kind of what I'm doing and why. And my apologies that I assembled him off camera, but I had already spent like 3 hours recording, and I don't even think I was home when I put it together. So you can see that I'm redoing things. But I think we're starting to see the softer lines, right? So we're just kind of adding those highlights with the paint pen, not the paint pen. You could do this with a paint pen. I haven't had great success with it. You can also use eyebrow liners. Not eyebrow liners, like throwaway eyeliner brushes. I haven't had great success with those either, but I have a bunch of them. But if you do like paint parties or something, that's a good way to kind of keep the cost down. So I had trouble going around the edges here. And feel free to skip this if you don't want to watch this part, but this is kind of just the way I finished it up. And then I go behind this with a dotting tool and I just add 3 little dots in some places where it made sense. And then I spray sealed it. Oh no, then I did the flicking of the white paint on here, which I can't remember if I recorded that or not. But then I spray sealed it with some clear satin spray that helps protect it from the elements, and then it also helps keep it from, you know, any charring on the wood from getting on anything else. And I glued the stand together. So here's a trick that I learned from Chris. When you like are gluing your stand together, put one bottom piece on your shelf sitter, and then while it's on your shelf sitter, put glue on it and then add the other piece so that you can make sure that they're perfectly aligned and that the little insert goes all the way through your stand on to the other side. It makes a humongous difference because I have not done that before and had it not fit, and so it's kind of a foolproof way. So just adding little white dots with my dotting tool, fresh paint, and then this guy will be ready to have a little white splatter right after we glue his flower on top of those dots that I just put on there. And then we'll finish him and I'll show you the final result. But I think he turns out really cute, and he's a fat little scarecrow. And there's a lot of scarecrow themed stuff that I have that you can. Oh, this is the splattering. Too much splattering, actually. Okay, so what I have is I've wet my paintbrush a little bit and I dipped it in some fresh white paint, and then I'm just kind of offloading some of that paint, and off to the side I'm flicking it to make sure it's going to be okay. But I got a little carried away and I got too much water in my brush, so you can see some of my splatters are big and they shouldn't really be like that. But you see how a little bit of splattering just kind of softens it, makes it look kind of cute. In her tutorial, she also splattered with a little bit of brown, which makes sense because he's a scarecrow and he's dirty. But I did not do that. But I just kind of dabbed the really obvious parts that were way too big. And then I just left it. I wasn't going to try to fix that. But I think he turned out cute. And I will show you what he looks like up close in a second. And I think I recorded like a picture of him standing up and finished. But obviously his stand will go on there in a minute. Okay, so here he is finished. I don't have him up on the stand, but you can see what he looks like. If you are interested in the wood blanks, shoot us an email. It's in the description box below. Thanks for watching. Bye. So here he is on his little stand, so you can see what he looks like upright. Thanks so much for watching. And I use an XTOOL laser, so if you're looking for a laser, my affiliate link is in the description box below. I absolutely love XTOOL. So thanks for watching. Bye.